Okie dokie. So welcome everyone. This is another edition of our Unbridled Leadership Labs that we're running every month. I'm always talking about some issue related to leadership or teamwork. And today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about sustainable leadership and what we can learn from nature, because this is a big, big passion of mine. Some of you will know that I have a leadership development business, and everything I do is shaped by what happens in the natural world. Because my biggest frustration when I used to work in corporate, and Chris and I used to work together back in the old days at Deloitte and Arthur Andersen, was the frustration of all this wasted time, energy, and resources that we see in the corporate world. And yet nature doesn't waste anything. So this really inspired me. And also at the same time, when I was working at Arthur Andersen, some of you might remember the big Arthur Andersen scandal when we went through Enron and the whole company, it was one of the top 5 accountancy firms in the world, disappeared overnight. And that was a real turnaround point actually in my life, because it was the first time I realized that a company wasn't going to take care of me. And so what I did was I actually went and bought my first horse. And then I became really interested in learning about the leadership lessons from my horses. So I also offer leadership interventions through the horses. So I thought today was a really great opportunity to talk a little bit about how some of my philosophy comes around and what we can learn from nature. So I've got together a kind of short presentation, although most people will know I tend to talk for too long. And then let's have a little bit of a discussion, but let me set some bit of a context for everyone about what's going on. So hopefully this is going to work. Share. And share that screen. Okie dokie. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen. Okay. And we can just talk about what's going on here. So what is a nature-based approach to leadership? Not surprising, it's rooted in nature. And what it considers, and this is what I really love, is that leadership is a system and business is a whole system, and it's not separate, but it's totally interconnected to the evolutionary process. And actually, I love the thought that when we actually think about a business, or in, a corporation, more importantly, the word corporation comes from the word corpus, that means body. So actually, if we start thinking about business or as a corporation, as a body that's made up of all these individual bits that all need to work together to make it function. So when we start thinking about business as an ecosystem, it really helps us move from this kind of mechanistic language that we use around business. And when I thought about this, we often talk about business as, controlling and managing, cogs in the wheel, get things done. But actually, business is a lot more fluid and adaptable and moves with the times as it's interconnected. So I think that the natural world, in a world where we live that is characterized by our VUCA world, the complexity and uncertainty, I think the principles of nature are offering us valuable insights into how to lead effectively. And it encourages us to draw on this innate intelligence and to guide individuals and teams towards success. And helps people elevate themselves. We were talking, Raymond and I, just before some of you joined us, about, everyone is a leader, and the importance of us all taking this responsibility for our own leadership and how we are in life, and to not be a victim to what's going on. So what we're going to look to today is look at some nature-inspired leadership, discover some of the lessons we can learn, pull together some actionable strategies to foster collaboration, innovation, and adaptability, and then have some meaningful discussions on ways that we can help implement this in our business. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein: "Look to nature and you will understand everything better." And I mean, I just think it's incredible that this was written so many years ago, but actually this is true today, and I think has never been truer for where we are. because the current ways that we run and lead businesses aren't sustainable for the 21st century. And we need a new way. We need a new methodology, a new blueprint. And I believe that that exists in nature. And in my book, Unbridled Business, that's exactly what we look at, how we can take lessons from nature and apply them to create a better way of running business. So how does nature-based leadership differ from what we believe leadership is now? And I think this is the most significant philosophy, is that we don't operate individually, but we all are part of this interconnected living system. And I love this diagram. You start with self, others, and the environment. Everything goes together. And what does this mean? It means that we need to stop looking at everything in business as isolated silos, the marketing department, the accounts department, the R&D function, which is what we're so often doing. And this is what stops a lack of collaboration and encourages the silo mentality within business. And my invitation for you today would be to think about how can we look at business where everything is connected together. And so what one department does has this ripple effect throughout the whole organization. And one of the reasons that I think that a lot of change initiatives don't work in business today is that we tend to work in one department and we completely fail to look at the ripple impact that changes in one area of the business are going to have throughout the rest of the organization. And this is so important because what do? We end up making one part of the organization super effective, but what's the impact on everything else? Everything else has sometimes a negative impact. So I think this is really important to help us take this systemic approach to running business and leadership, that we need to think about how everything goes together. And I think as well, when we think about business, often when we think about business, the single purpose, certainly in the past, of business has been to make a profit. And clearly that's important. A business isn't sustainable if it doesn't make profit. But actually, maybe a different reframe is to look at the purpose of business. And the purpose of business is to give back and examine maybe what is the cost of the profit to the natural environment. Because I think one of the challenges that we have now is sometimes business likes to think of itself separate from the natural world. We're integrally part of it. So what we do affects the natural world around us. So it's really important that we really start moving people from this ego perspective of business to this eco perspective of business, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. So nature ecosystems as a model for sustainable, resilient systems. I think what's fascinating to me and why I think nature has the answer and the blueprint for so much of what's going on today is that it's been evolving and survived for like 3.8 billion years. And how's it done that? Well, it operates in balance and harmony, with each component playing a vital role. And so when we look at this picture on the screen here of the forest there with the river running through it, we see that each element can't survive without the other. The forest plants need the water to grow. The sunlight also needs to come in to make everything work. The root system of the forest all interconnects to help it share nutrients. The water is obviously coming ultimately from the atmosphere, from the clouds and everything else when it rains. So everything is interrelated and one thing impacts everything else. So I think what we see in nature is that nature systems thrive because they're interdependent, resilient, and able to adapt to change. Perhaps a great example of that is the forest fires that we've seen, the horrific forest fires that have happened a lot in places across Australia and America. But, you look at how nature regenerates after something like that, after a massive, what you might call devastating event. it picks itself up and everything works together and it regenerates itself. So nature is always looking at the long term. And I think this is something as business leaders that we need to do. We need to look at the long term. And so many businesses, and the way, unfortunately, we have businesses structured where we report to the stock exchange every 90 days for many publicly traded businesses, is that encourages a very short-term thinking mentality. And I'd really encourage you to think and play for the longer term, what Simon Sinek calls the infinite game. And what we see in nature is as well this distributed leadership, or what I often refer to as shared leadership. We see this most acutely because my passion is horses. I tend to look at herds of wild horses. Say, for example, in a herd of wild horses, where there isn't really a particular leader, but the horses will move and take the leadership position depending on what's happening. So if you're one of the ranks and you see this mountain lion coming up, and the mountain lion, of course, is the biggest threat in a herd of wild horses, because they're prey animals, the horse that actually sees that danger will then move to the front and lead the herd to a place of safety. And unfortunately, we don't see this in business because we have such a hierarchical structure that even if our team members see some danger, and that danger might be, a piece of new technology coming into the market, what some of their competitors are doing, people don't feel like they're able to speak up and say anything. And of course, what happens is then sometimes we see the predator, in this case, the lion, actually taking the business out because we haven't adapted and moved and changed to what's going on in the environment around us. So natural systems in nature, we're always looking at what is sustainable and what is going to keep us going in the long term. And, some examples of this are bee colonies. We see how bee colonies work collectively together. They really demonstrate efficient teamwork, and they've got role specialization going on. This forest here, we talk about the wood wide web, because in the forest, the roots and the mycelium of all the root systems are all interconnected together, sharing the nutrients. So the forest operates in a symbiotic nature. And this is really where I think we need to go with leadership, this concept of shared leadership and this symbiosis of where everybody's working together to make things happen. So let me just stop sharing for a moment, and I'm just going to come back into the room. And I'm just wondering, has anyone got any comments that they'd like to share on that? Anything that your thoughts, has that piqued any of your interest about anything? Just shout out because we're only a small group. Yeah.
So one of the things that was true when you were talking about the forest fires and the regeneration from it, I think it's absolutely right that there are these catastrophic events, whether that's in business or whether that's in nature, and nature naturally regenerates from it. But I think what's important is that nature takes what comes out of that catastrophic event, for example, from the forest fire, the ash that's created, the clearing of the space, the removal of all the debris, and it takes all of that and then regenerates to something else. And I think in business, that's and leadership, sometimes it's very easy to try and recreate what was happened before the catastrophic event, or just rebuild exactly like we had before. And it's like, well, why don't we just take the learning and the output and rebuild forward?
No, absolutely. And that's really interesting because one of the big topics now for leaders is this whole concept of reinvention. I study with somebody called and doing a whole load of work actually with reinvention at the moment with an incredible lady. And some of the latest research was that I think it was, if I remember off the top of my head, 45% of CEOs recognize that they're going to have to reinvent their business within the next 3 to 5 years. The rapid change which we're living in of both technology and just the general environment, you know, the socio-economic changing of workforces and everything else means that businesses are just going to have to start reinventing themselves, and that almost becomes the norm. And yeah, we can't reinvent ourselves to what we were before. Reinvention means changing and transforming, like you said there, Andy, taking the best of the old, bringing it forward, and harnessing that to create something different. So I think reinvention becomes a really, really important topic for us in business as we move forward. And it'll be interesting to see how many companies really get can get their mind around actually doing that, because that's a big mindset shift for a lot of CEOs of businesses. How do we completely reinvent our business to make it fit for purpose going forward? So it's going to be really fascinating to see. And of course, we know the impact of not reinventing, right? Kodak, Blockbuster videos, Nokia. You know, I was the girl who had the Nokia and I thought they were going to last forever. I think I've even got one actually somewhere in my house. And then when you do the research on Nokia, it's so interesting because they had started coming up with some kind of smartphone prototype, but they just didn't think anyone was going to be interested in it. So they didn't continue to reinvest in it. And look what the impact was. You know, BlackBerry, there's so many that have fallen along the wayside. So, okay. Has anyone?
I just offer a couple of comments.
Please do, Chris. Yeah.
As a beekeeper.
Right. Oh, God. Interesting.
That analogy is very, very good. There's so many dimensions to it. I mean, there are literally academic studies on the democracy of the hive due to its unique voting protocol. You know, they self-elect who the leader is. Yeah. You know, the queen is, gets ejected by a process of voting. They create some new queens, and then they force the old queen to leave. In a way, if businesses could do the same with CEOs, they would be a lot better off sometimes, because you know, the queen in that scenario only lives 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years. But unfortunately, most CEOs try to have longevity, and I think the mental capacities of many of the businesses and leaderships are too short term. And the hive is a very interesting scenario, and also they're subject to pests and changes in the atmosphere, and they've currently got you know, the Asian hornets now come in as a new threat, a bit like AI has arrived in the world of business. So, there's lots of analogies you could make with them.
Yeah. And wouldn't that be interesting, you know, if all the team members get to vote on whether rejecting the CEO and getting a new one? Wouldn't that be fascinating? Exactly. I'm seeing the shock on Andy's face there.
I was thinking of 2 or 3 businesses that I've worked with that were just like, that would have been great.
But
we have a lot of
I'm
just saying.
Go on, Raymond. Sorry.
No, always.
No, go, please.
In the forest, we have a lot of wildflowers and wild orchids, and people who come and walk through the forest then want to replicate. Well, how do you get your orchids? There's one particular orchid called the bird's nest orchid, and they're fascinated and don't realize that the orchid only grows when it has this symbiotic relationship with the tree roots and the fungus. So it's a 3-way symbiotic relationship. And not only that, but the bird's nest orchid doesn't come to flower every year. It probably comes to flower every 5 or 10 years. So when you see an orchid come up in one particular spot, you can't assume the next year it's going to come up in the same spot. And I always think leadership is a bit like that. That if you can't produce the results that you produced yesterday in the future without involving change and without being prepared to change. Because if you always do what you've always done, you won't always get what you've always got without change. And I think this sustainability and building from each other shows itself greatly in these ecosystems in the forest with mushrooms, but particularly with orchids because they're very, very difficult to. And people try to reproduce them, and for some orchids, like the bird's nest orchid, it's nigh impossible to do.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, there's so many analogies if we just stop and take some time and just think. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all for those contributions. So let me just share a little bit more. Okay. 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 So let's just have a look at nature as a leadership model then. Here are just a few thoughts for you. Interesting, in nature, we've only got one stakeholder, and that is the planet. And, you know, of course, that's very different to business where we've got many stakeholders. But I guess ultimately, you know, the stakeholder in our business is the planet. If we don't look after the planet, then we may not have our businesses to keep going forward. We also talk about nature holds the solution. And as we said, nature's been around for 3.8 billion years, and it's been evolving, thriving, and surviving and adapting. So I think it holds these different models that we can use to create solutions. And, you know, you guys have just already shared a little bit about, you know, the bees, and you know, what happens with the regeneration of forests. So I think, you know, there's so many lessons we can learn if we just look. And of course, leadership is a living system, and we are all part of it and not separate from it. And I think, you know, this is something that we really need to take back into business, is this understanding that everything in business is interconnected. And as I said, you know, this ripple effect, what we do in one part of the organization impacts everything else. And not just within the organization, but that ripple effect from the organization to everything around the organization, to the wider environment, to the world. We also talk about leaders as guardians. So I think this is really interesting because nature creates environments for everyone to thrive and benefit. And I think that's what we need to do within our organizations. I believe that more and more as leaders, we have a responsibility for looking after and nurturing our people. We know the whole agenda of health and well-being at work, you know, that's really been given to leaders as another part of their job to do that they weren't previously doing. So all of a sudden, I'm working with a lot of middle managers that are really squeezed because senior leadership has given them, look after the health and well-being of all of your team members. The team members want them to look after their health and well-being, and the people in the middle are really being squeezed. But, you know, if we create environments where people go home from work in a great mood, then they're nicer to their spouse and their partner, and they're nicer to their kids, and we create this positive, harmonious ripple effect out, versus the contra, where people go home from work and they've had a bad day and they slam things on the table, and now they're being, you know, mean to their partner and spouse and their kids, and we create this negative ripple effect. So we do need to think about, how do we create conditions for people to thrive at work? I think it's also important that every change begins with a person. And every one of us can create human connection and communication that can change everything. And lastly, nature as a leadership model, we need to enable others to drive sustainable change. So one of our roles as well is to connect people with their natural intelligence and coach them to drive the sustainable change within the organization. So today I just wanted to share 4 key principles of natural leadership. And the first is about balance and harmony, because nature does this really well. There's a really reliable rhythm and balance and harmony to nature. So, you know, we can pretty much get guaranteed the sun, or at least daylight, will appear every single day. Not so much sun out today, but there is some. And you know, in the evening, it's dark, right? So we have a rhythm every day, sun up, sun down. We've got the seasons going on throughout the year, although I've got to say today doesn't really look that much like a deep autumnal stroke winter day. But anyway, But we've got this season and this harmony, and this provides, I think, some reassurance and security that we know what's going to happen. So the balance and harmony is really important. And, when we look at this picture of those little rocks there, none of them, the one on the top, can't be there without all the others beneath it. Because this is just really shows, again, this need for the interconnectedness. And everything needs to prioritize collaboration and partnership. And this is something I don't see a lot in business, this collaboration and partnership happening. Because in order for that to happen in business, we've got to create really strong relationships built on trust and empathy and mutual respect. And we've really got to help our team members foster this sense of belonging amongst the team. And all of that creates this balance and harmony, this sense of belonging that we're part of something. So that would be my invitation for you, is to look about how do we create balance and harmony within our workplaces? How do we create a culture that encourages experimentation without people getting penalized, so that we create this harmonious workplace? Because I think that's one of the things I see a lot, is people don't come up with innovation and feeding into the next point, adaptability and resilience, because they're afraid of what might be said. So how do we create a culture that allows people to do that? And then, of course, the second point here is adaptability and resilience. And I love here, we've got the little gecko. I think such a great example of a creature that is really adaptable, changing its colors in order to blend in when it needs to. And we've just talked a little bit about reinvention. This need to adapt and change is just becoming paramount within business today, as we live in such a VUCA world where everything is changing. So we have to foster this culture, again, as I said, of flexibility and experimentation, and empower our team members to navigate this uncertainty with confidence and resilience. I think we can draw on, the natural world for examples of resilience. We just talked there about the forest fires, how they bounce back from that adversity. And how do we see challenges as opportunities for growth and leverage setbacks as catalysts for innovation and improvement? And all of this, when we can do this, this inspires confidence and preservation in the face of uncertainty. And when we look at sustainable growth, there is no wasted time, energy, or resources in nature. Everything happens for a reason. And as nature, as we talked about, is having this longer term perspective on what needs to go on. So when we help leaders align their actions with the principles of sustainability, we create value to both the organization and the planet. And finally, this collective intelligence. It's really important that we recognize in business that everyone's opinion matters. And I often talk about, the good old teamwork analogy, 1 + 1 = 3. I believe that teamwork is a superpower when we get everyone's opinion on board and we work with the collective intelligence of everybody within our organization. We're able to accelerate the growth of our organizations exponentially. And in nature, there's lots of examples of collective intelligence. I mean, the most common one that we often talk about is the flock of birds. When, any of you that have seen the mass migrations of birds, they all fly together, hundreds and hundreds of them, and yet they never bash into each other. They all understand what their sphere of influence is, and they work as one, and they distribute the leadership. We see that in the Canadian geese, for example, where different geese rotate to the front of the V formation in order to move the flock forward. And often what I've been reading recently is that certain geese know parts of the route. So they all actually need to work together, because not anyone knows the whole A to B journey. Different geese know different parts of the journey. And I think one of the things in business right now is that as leaders, we can't know everything. And this is why shared leadership is so important. Because gone are the days where the leader used to be, in charge of your factory and everyone was making widgets in the old industrial age. And nobody knew much about outside of their little sphere where they lived. But nowadays, with the internet and Google and everything else, we all know everything about everything if we want to. So there's just no way that one leader can know everything in business. So that means as leaders, we need to become more vulnerable and pour the resources of everybody in the team so that we can move forward. The other thing that nature does really well is collaborate. They know what they bring to the party. And I just love this little cartoon. You see, we see the people with the nice square wheels and they're making progress, right? They're moving forward. But somebody goes, oh, perhaps you might want to try these round wheels. I think they're going to make everything easier. So what I think in business that we have a bit of a fear of collaboration because we're afraid of putting ideas forward for fear of what other people would say. And I really love this graphic that I stole from a book called Leading from the Roots, which is a really, really interesting read, which looks at the difference between human systems and nature's ecosystems about collaboration. So, you know, in the human system, we pay and hire and promote individuals, whereas in nature, relationships are at the center of everything. In the human systems, we've got no rewards for collaboration, but in nature, collaboration is rewarded. In the human system, collaboration is assigned, but in nature, collaboration occurs naturally and is a choice. And that's what I love to see in business. In human systems, our collaboration is episodic, whereas in nature, it lasts for a lifetime. And I think about some of the collaborative relationships between when I was in Africa that I used to see between the African water buffalo and the cattle egrets. And the cattle egrets often sit and land on the water buffaloes. It gives them a good perch to let them know, the water buffalo know where any danger is coming. And the reciprocity of that is that the water buffalo allows the egret to eat all of the little mites and bacteria on his back. So there's a symbiotic relationship that occurs there. In our human systems, power has affected our relationships, whereas in nature, relationships are designed with mutuality and respect. I think that's really, really important. Often in the human system, building relationships is viewed as a waste of time. And I think right now that we've moved into a much more hybrid and remote working environment, this has become a real challenge because people just aren't building relationships in business. And I often talk to my clients about how we have to consciously build relationships. Whereas in nature, relationships are chosen, grow to build trust and commitment. And lastly, in the human system, collaborative projects are framed as goals to be accomplished. Whereas in the ecosystem, collaboration supports a higher purpose and future generations. So I think there's a lot we can just learn there from that one slide about how we can work differently if we just look to nature. So let's just look at some practical implications in business terms. And I love this quote from Terry Tempest Williams. Wilderness reminds us that what it means to be human, what we are connected to rather than what we are separate from. And, you know, I know Raymond, you know, out in his forests in Wales, you know, he certainly immerses himself in wilderness. And I think, you know, this is why there's so many and so much talk at the moment about the power of being out in nature from a mental health perspective, because that actually helps us reconnect to ourselves and who we really are. And I think a lot of people right now are really disconnected from who they are. So what else do we learn from nature? We learn about this importance of moving from ego to ecosystem. So habits, ego, and status must be relinquished, and position must be stepped away from. And this means in leadership, we need to think about renewed connections to values and a clarity and creativity of vision and physical and emotional ease, a way of being that engages and inspires others naturally, because our natural state is really powerful and authentic. And it brings intellectual clarity, emotional openness, and physical ease. And then when we're in this position of ecosystem where we're all working together, we can work to help solve some of these global challenges across our system. But way too often in business, they're very, very ego driven by the leader at the top. And so we really have to get rid of this thinking about, what's our fiefdom? This is just my area. I don't want to collaborate with anyone else. To think about how do we collectively work to meet the aims of the business and create a business ecosystem? Because exceptional human connection and communication fuel everything. And we know that change is only going to happen if we stay connected. We've talked about nature is all about relationships. And this is what we need to persevere with within business. Because everything that happens in business happens through relationships, connection, and effective communication. And it's really important, therefore, that people understand and we manage to optimize our leaders and our team members' innate natural resources. And we get people in the right roles doing the right thing to make our teams the most dynamic and effective they can be. And some of you will know that I'm massively passionate about something here called the GC Index, Game Changing Index, which helps people understand the impact and contribution they make within an organization. Because if we just have people working in the right roles, then how we can just change business for the better. And, this actually works to the business life cycle, like we've got the seasons, we've got a business life cycle. So, at the beginning of a project, you want something like a game changer who comes up with new ideas and transforms the future. But no good having great ideas if we can't put them into plans that people can understand, which is what a strategist does. But then, of course, no idea is having great ideas if nobody executes them. So that's where our implementer comes in to help us build the future. And then our polisher comes in to continually re-improve things. And so if you think about that as a product life cycle, you start it, you develop the idea, you get the growth of it, and then you continually improve and enhance it in order to then adapt it so that you can go back to the start again and come with a new program or a new solution. And in the middle, we've got the playmakers who are orchestrating the team and making everything happen. So in nature, everybody understands the roles and the responsibilities and how they add and create and support the whole initiative. And again, this is something I don't think we do as well as we could in business. So this means we need to build a culture of agility where we can respond quickly to all of the changing conditions so we can survive and thrive. And lastly, I'd like you to already invite you to think about how do we encourage sustainable practices? And I like to think here about the 4 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, and purpose, because everybody within our organizations needs to start contributing to the success of the whole and how we all fit into the ecosystem of the world in order to make things work effectively, not just for the business, but for the wider organization in which we exist. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing, see if anyone's got any comments or anything you'd like to share. Thoughts?
I've got one.
Yeah, please go, Anthony.
Yeah, interesting thoughts in there. I mean, one of the big things that I try and look at and try and champion through, which is quite challenging in the role that I have, is through a people process rather than going directly to the end product or trying to build the end product, because we need to understand there's elements in those peoples and processes that need optimization to then enable the last bit. So I can understand where that comes from going back to the other analogy pieces where things are broken in like the fires or something. They'll look at just naturally understanding where they can regrow that process.
Yep.
The starting analogy.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. And, we've obviously got to know what the end of mind is, but we know that people are like the biggest resource in our organization. We've got to get the people and processes aligned in order to get the performance and the results. And sometimes we try and get that, but this bit doesn't work. And then we never get that. Like the bridge is broken between the two. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyone else got anything else they'd like to share?
sometimes talk about the lie that the Cheshire Cat told Alice in Wonderland.
Right.
So we all know the story that she falls down the hole and she sees these roads and she asks the Cheshire Cat which road she should take.
Mm.
And he said, well, where do you want to go? And because she didn't know where she wanted to go, he said, well, it doesn't matter what road you take. Well, what a big lie that was. Because it does matter what road we take. And sometimes we don't always see we don't always have the vision of the mission and see the exact results. But people and ourselves need a bit of guidance of the direction.
Mm-hmm.
And we might not see or come to know what it is exactly we're looking for, but we're moving in towards that direction. And of course, the road you take does matter, and it's better to be moving in the right direction than on a road that is taking you in the wrong direction.
Yeah, but and against that, you've got to have some idea of what that road, what that direction is, right? Because I think so many people, you and I were talking before, about being a victim, versus taking control of your life, and this is about what's your personal purpose, what's your business purpose. You've got to know, if the end of the call today, we all decide that we want to go to London, we've got to know that, because if not, and we don't articulate that clearly, some of us might end up in Scotland. It's like, oh, that's not where I wanted to go. So there is something I think about intentionality, that nature is very discerning. And it's got a clear intention, where I look at the herd of horses, their clear purpose, it's not that complicated, is to survive. As prey animals, it is to survive. Sometimes I think as humans, we've got too many choices. And then we're like, oh yeah, well, whatever, should I have in that house, or should I take that career or that career? Whereas actually, we've just got to make a decision and decide what we want, and then go along the path. And the path will never be straight, right? The path will always wind to get us to where we want to go. But unless we know where we want to go and start taking steps, we're never going to get there.
Yeah, I see it with the university students a lot, where they have an idea that, well, this is what I want to do in life.
Mm-hmm.
And the days are gone where people normally are in an employment for 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's very rare now, that you meet someone who's retiring and they've been in the same job, in the same role, or the same direction. And I always talk to them and say, well, what's your priorities? Is it just to make money, or do you want to help people, or do you want to build things, or do you want to design things? Where are the things that you enjoy doing the most? And that gives them a general thought without specifically saying. And some of them believe that they're doing their degree, and then when they finish their degree, they're going to have this magnificent job that was all to do with what the degree that they've done. And of course, that's not always the case.
And increasingly, I think some of the latest research I saw was something like a lot of the skills will be obsolete in 3 to 5 years' time. So, the irony is we've got people going to university and either, the job that or the course they signed up for, actually roles don't exist doing that because everything's morphed so quickly. So it's about understanding what type of activities energize you. Is it creative, but creativity could take a number of different forms, right? Baking, painting, building something. But what is it? If it's something creative, or is it something a lot more analytical, for example? I think it's knowing that broad category that you fall in, and then looking for careers and things, because it will all just shape out differently.
Yeah, one of my sons, when he was choosing university, we said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to study medicine, Dad." I said, "Well, why do you want to study medicine?" He says, "Because I want to be a doctor." I said, "Well, why do you want to be a doctor?" He said, "Well, all your friends have big cars and big houses, and they're doctors." And I said, "But that's not the reason to be a doctor.
Exactly.
You need to study business and accountancy if that's what you want." If you said to me, well, I like helping people and I get great joy out of it, then that would be a reason to be a doctor. Yeah. But if your role is money. Anyway, he went to study business and accountancy, and he's doing very well.
Good. Yeah. So I think, this is where nature's really clear on what needs to happen and has got a roadmap for where it wants to go. And things change and things evolve over time. But it's always striving to get to where it wants to go. And that would be my invitation to you. So I'm conscious that we're at time. I just wanted to share a couple of resources with you before we close today. Okay. So I think, today, the takeaways that I'd love you to take away is think about, how is everything interconnected and how can you look at different ways of doing things and that appreciation of this interconnectedness of everything we do in life. Everything we do has this impact ripple around it. And, how can you become more aware of the impact ripple you're creating? To really think about how can we move to a much more collaborative mindset rather than a mindset of competition, because nature is entirely collaborative. It doesn't really compete. There is some odd competition for resources, but at the end of the day, can't even spell collaboration either. Everything is working together for the harmony of the ecosystem, right? Because everything's got to eat, and if everything doesn't eat, the ecosystem goes out of balance. And there is an incredible video actually that I'll send you afterwards about Yellowstone Park, and actually the impact of the ecosystem when they put back wild wolves back into the ecosystem and how that shifted everything. So just one change shifted everything, because the wolves came back in, they started eating the deer, which meant that there were more plants could flourish because the deer weren't eating them. And then the rivers redirected themselves in different ways. And it was just really, really fascinating. Really shows how everything's interconnected together. So we'll send you a link to that because it's on YouTube. And then lastly, just think about adaptability and resilience and how that's something that we really need in today's environment. So we'll just conclude with this note from Senna, a philosopher. True wisdom consists in not departing from nature, but in holding our conduct according to her laws and model. That's fascinating. So if anyone would like to learn a bit more about teamwork, I have a quiz that you can take. We'll send you links to these afterwards as well. And Fred seems to have disappeared. Otherwise, he put it in the chat for me. So impactfulteamwork.scoreapp.com. There I have a quiz that you can take on finding out which of the pillars you need to be working on to be an impactful team. Please do connect with me if we're not connected on LinkedIn. Feel free to subscribe to my podcast. It's Impactful Teamwork. There's a post on my feed right now because it's just come out today at 11 o'clock. Comes out every Tuesday, where we talk about things about teamwork, and there's a lot about natural leadership in today's one. And I'm always happy to have a teamwork ignition call with you. If you'd like to come and discuss anything about how teams can work more effectively, how you can work with natural leadership principles, then please do book into my calendar at calendly.com/Julia Felton/discovery. Always love to have a chat and share ideas and come up with new thinking for you. So with that, I think we are done for today. Has anyone got any comments they'd like to share before we go?
I've been really enjoying it too for what you've done. And if anyone ever wants to come and visit an ancient forest in North Wales, just message me on LinkedIn and book a time, and you can have miles and miles of walks and tracks to walk in an ancient forest.
Excellent. Oh, thank you very much, Raymond, for that generous offer. Okay. So everyone else, Anthony, Chris, Andy, so good to meet you all. Nice to see you again. Chris, I'm going to connect with you about bees because my partner wants to know about beekeeping, so I'll give you a shout about that. That's Andy, fine. I'll see you tomorrow. And Anthony, nice to meet you.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Nice to meet
right,
you.
everyone. Thank you so much for your
Thanks,
time.
guys. Bye-bye.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.